Hey everybody, my name is Jared and I am a Master Mason in the state of Mississippi in the United States of America. And this is the bicentennial tie for the Grand Lodge of Mississippi, celebrating our 200th anniversary this year. The tie was done by Edgar over at Masonic Revival. And today's viewer's question is, how is extreme conflict in the lodge resolved? I can totally understand where this question comes from. Look at it from somebody outside of the fraternity. You look at a group who espouses about meeting on the level and being on the square and brotherly love and all sorts of these kind of we don't ever have problems kind of mentalities, if you like. But in your mind, you are used to dealing with your own interpersonal experiences, the people you meet in your own life, the job that you go to, or whatever the case may be, and you know that even in some of the most humble areas, some of the most, we could even go to the extreme and say even at an environment like a church, there can be extreme conflict. And so you say to yourself, well, surely this happens to the Freemasons, no matter how on the level they are or whatever they feel that they may be. And you'd be right. It does happen. After all, we're just men who have an aspiration about perfecting ourselves just in a similar way, not just like, but in a similar way, the people, what you're looking for when you go to church. So if we do actually experience this extreme conflict, how is it handled? Well, I think what the viewer's asking is, what happens after we get past the preliminary steps? I think that there are some things that need to be considered. First of all, the worshipful master of that lodge, the head of that lodge, should have been paying enough attention to his members and the general feeling of the lodge to notice that there's something amiss, that something needs to be addressed before a mountain is made out of a molehill. So the worshipful master should be making those observations and trying to notice if something's going wrong and fix it in advance. Similarly, here in the state of Mississippi, every lodge is required to have a committee on complaints and grievances. And that committee, according to our bylaws, has specific duties that include essentially generally keeping a watch over the craft and letting the lodge know if problems are coming up. So I think the question that's really kind of what we're getting to the head of here is what happens at like a Masonic trial or something like that. There are steps that can be taken before we get to a point where a trial is necessary, and then there are things in the trial that really let you know there's different punishments. Let me put it that way. There's different things that could happen, and they have different scales, just like a disciplinary action at work. You know, there's different scales. You don't have to be fired the first time, but you might need to get your wrist slapped and have a verbal warning. And there's something similar to that in Freemasonry. I'm kind of being vague because I know that every single jurisdiction is going to have different rules and different ways of going through the process. So for the sake of this video, I think what we really want to do is remind our brethren that while we have people like the Worshipful Master, people like this committee I mentioned in the state of Mississippi who keep a general watch over the craft, maybe in your jurisdiction it's a duty specifically for the junior warden, and there may be other positions in your lodge where it's to a specific chair to deal with that. But it doesn't have to stop there. You know, I get sick of it when people think that it's not my job, that's not what I'm required to do, therefore I'm not doing that. If you want to just put in the minimal amount of effort into anything, then there's a lot of stuff you shouldn't be bothering doing, let alone being a Freemason. I just don't think that's a good fit. I don't think you can actually practice Freemasonry if in your mind all you're trying to do is the absolute minimum that is required by the bylaws. Okay? So that is something that needs to be a spear to the heart of every Freemason. It's not just the worshipful master's job to keep harmony in the lodge or some subcommittee's job to do that. Every single one of us who is a master mason has the right to correct our brethren, and we must do it. We must be willing to say, hey brother, I don't know if I'd do that. Hey brother, let me talk to you about something. And look, if you have that personality and you're about to tell me, Jared, I'm just not comfortable with conflict, I can't do that. Brother, I'm looking you in the eye and I'm telling you, you gotta take a baby step. The first time you see something that you can correct that's not egregious, something that you think might not cause that extreme conflict, and you just correct something small, take the opportunity and do it. Break the ice and learn how to talk to a fellow human being about something that is not right. You've got to do it. You cannot go through life espousing the principles of Freemasonry and not be willing to tell somebody, don't do that. Okay? Now, Freemasonry is the optimal place to practice this skill, because think of all the principles and tenets that we espouse, and no Freemason should have any right to bite back at you if you try to offer that correction and you do it in a brotherly way. If they bite back, then they're in the wrong, not you. Okay, so we should be trying to temper our passions within ourselves. That's step one. Get right with yourself so that you don't allow something to get to a point where it becomes an extreme conflict. Then, should that fail, because we are all still trying to subdue those passions, I don't think one of us has completely found success in that, and our other brethren don't help us out, or we don't seem to find resolution through their help, or we can't find resolution through that subcommittee or the worshipful master, and there is conflict. Something happens in the lodge involving brethren that simply cannot stand. How does that get resolved? Well, somebody has to file charges. Somebody basically, just like signing an affidavit to charge somebody with something criminally, here in Masonry it's a similar process. You have to file charges against that brother. There are stipulations on how that is done and what information has to be included and all that kind of good stuff. Here in Mississippi, that's received by the master of the lodge and is turned over to this committee I mentioned before on complaints and grievances. They investigate the matter, well, I'm kind of skipping around here. Let me finish this line of thought off. He presents it to them, they do a bit of investigation, and then they come back and report to the lodge, and then the lodge makes a decision on whether or not to go to trial. So you could sort of kind of look at that as like a grand jury. This committee of complaints and grievances assesses the charges and then comes back to the lodge, gives their findings on whether or not they think that the evidence has any value to move forward, and then the lodge ballots on whether or not to go to trial. Just taking a half a step back, the lodge does not have to, in the state of Mississippi, get that committee to make that recommendation. The master can call for a vote immediately without going through the grand jury process, if you like, and make a decision on go to trial or not. If it does not go to trial, then the charges are not adopted, they drop off, and that's it. No trial. If it does go to trial, let's just say that the process can be long and get down to the point where, there's one thing I think I should mention in here. It is possible in a Masonic trial where the lodge is opened in the third degree that people who are not Masons can be involved in the trial. Now, that's not to say that they're going to go into the lodge, but they can be interviewed by or get a disposition by, deposed. I'm going to say, somebody comments, fix my wording. They can do an interview of somebody who's not a Freemason and then bring that evidence back into the lodge. So it's quite interesting how all of these different aspects are really taken into account. But then, when it's all said and done, there are just a couple options that the lodge has. They can decide to formally charge the person with something, and that's it. They're just charged. They can get a reprimand. They can be suspended for a finite amount of time. So maybe the master suspends them for 3 stated communications or something like that. They could be suspended indefinitely. So you're suspended. We're not kicking you out of Freemasonry, but we'll call you. Don't bother calling us. And then you can just be flat out expelled. You can be excommunicated. You can be dropped off. You can become not a member anymore. Whichever word you want to use. You are no longer a member of the Masonic fraternity and you are kicked out. And that's about it. Those are the options that the lodge has. Here in Mississippi, it's a set list that you can pick from. Of course, if it's something like a finite amount of time, the lodge is at its own discretion. But there's no other things. We can't just decide, well, you know what, it'd be really great if we just made him pay a fine or something like that. That's not an option here in Mississippi. So, there you are. Extreme conflict in a lodge. Yes, it happens. No, it should not. But if it does, yes, we have ways to deal with it. Thank you all so much for taking the time to watch. I really do appreciate that. And thanks so much to the people who head over to the donations page and help support the show. I really do appreciate that as well. Thank you all so much for taking the time to watch. We'll see you next time. Bye.